Welcome to the Autism Info Center's Autism Infocast with your host, Peter Clark.
Hi, I'm Peter Clark, and I started the Autism Info Center with two goals in mind. First, if you're autistic, I'll help you understand yourself a bit better and show you some ways to live a happier, more satisfying life. Second, if you're not autistic, I'll help you understand what autism is, what it isn't, what it's like to be autistic, and how you can help autistic people everywhere. So let's get straight into it. So what is autism? Autism is, very simply put, a difference in how the brain works. If you're autistic, then your brain works slightly different from other people's brains. That doesn't mean it's wrong, it doesn't mean it's incorrect or defective, it doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It just means you're different. Lots of things are different. There are different types of dogs, different types of cats, but they're all still dogs and cats. They just happen to be different. Everyone knows a Labrador is different from a poodle, and we accept that. With autism, people exhibit their differences in different ways, which is why they call it a spectrum. The spectrum of autism doesn't refer to how autistic you are, it refers to the different ways in which autism affects you. So, for example, some autistic people will have more problems with communicating, perhaps from being non-verbal all the way down to just having a bit of difficulty understanding social cues and social norms. Some people with autism have completely normal social lives. Others, as I say, have great difficulty forming friendships or maintaining relationships. They have difficulty understanding what other people are saying because perhaps they have a very literal understanding of words, whereas most people are good at working out meaning, reading between the lines. So autism can be a variety of things, and it can present very differently, which is why it's a spectrum. You can never just look at somebody and say, well, they're autistic. What you need to do is to get to understand the person and what sort of issues they have and how best to support them. Some autistic people have problems with social interactions, like navigating group situations or learning the unspoken rules. That often happens in workplaces where everybody knows that you don't do a certain thing on a certain day, or everybody just seems to know that when you're in a meeting, you speak a certain way, or you use certain words, or you don't mention certain subjects. However, an autistic person probably hasn't learned those rules. They don't have the same level of awareness socially as other people. And so quite often this means that they appear to be a bit different and perhaps, in some people's words, also a bit weird. I've been accused of that myself many times. It leads to misunderstandings. It leads to other people thinking that someone who's autistic isn't a team player because they prefer to work on their own. They prefer to get on with what they've been told to do. The other thing that's very big in autism is sensory processing. The differences between someone who's autistic and someone who's not autistic might not be terribly obvious, but they may be either hypersensitive, which means oversensitive, or they might be hyposensitive, which means undersensitive, to things like light or sound or touch or smell, any of the senses that we take for granted around us. So, for example, I'm autistic and I am hypersensitive to sound. If there's a small, tiny, insignificant sound that's constantly going on in the background, it will fill my brain completely. A tap dripping 3 rooms away is enough to stop me being able to concentrate on the TV program I'm trying to watch. I won't be able to rest until I've got up and gone and found the tap, turned it off, cured the drip, if necessary, fix the tap, and I won't be able to carry on until that's done. That's a normal autistic behaviour. Other people see it as being a little bit dysfunctional, because it does mean that quite often you can't carry on with your day until you've got small issues sorted out. Autistic people often have undersensitivities as well, these hyposensitivities. So, for example, they may not be able to taste food as well as other people. So they might seek out really strong flavours, or very spicy curries, or ice cream that is extremely cold and extremely flavoursome. They might need these stimulations, these sensory experiences to be able to regulate themselves and keep themselves on an emotional even keel. Autistic people often also have very deep, passionate special interests. And I'm not just talking about your average hobby where you're quite enthusiastic and you spend every weekend doing something, and you go out and you fly your drone, or you race your model cars or whatever. We're talking about a level of commitment to a particular subject that is unusual. An autistic person will often have an interest in something that they feel everybody else should share as well. So that often happens where you're talking to someone who's autistic and they'll spend 3 hours explaining the minute details of why the Hornby 00 had a particular gauge of railway and how that came about, and how the wheels work, and how the tracks work, and how the sleepers work, and how the signals and the junctions work. And how high the station platform needs to be in the models in order for the imaginary passengers to be able to get on and off the train properly. You get incredible detail about something that you might think is perhaps uninteresting to you. So autism, as I said, often makes people look a little bit strange. But what is actually going on is that an autistic person is trying to keep themselves balanced, keep themselves in check, regulate their feelings and their emotions and their thoughts, keep their brain calm. Inside an autistic brain is usually a great deal of mental processing going on that other people are completely unaware of. Quite often an autistic person's head is busy for minutes at a time, just dealing with a very small, insignificant thing that just happened. This means that they quite often don't respond immediately when something happens or when they're asked a question, because their brain actually needs to sit and think about these things, work out the ramifications. What does it mean? Is it possible that somebody's meant something that they didn't understand correctly? What is the correct response? Have they been in this situation before? What was the best response then? What responses have got you in trouble before? What responses worked best before? Then you've got to choose the right response. Then you've got to say the right response and try and present your body language in such a way that you know is generally received well. All of this takes time, and it takes a lot of energy. So as a result, many autistic people have what they call a processing delay, which is simply the time taken to mentally calculate the correct response and try to remember what works and what doesn't. This is all aimed at making you fit into society. So that leads us on to the next thing, is that autistic people do a thing called masking. Masking is, at its most basic level, trying to look as normal as possible, so that other people don't point at them and say, hey, you're weird. That is essentially trying to fit into society in a way that doesn't come naturally to an autistic person. So when you're masking, you are probably very closely observing what other people are doing and saying in similar circumstances. You're making a mental database of all the things that you've seen and the circumstances in which you saw them, what the outcomes were, whether things worked, whether things didn't work, whether people got upset, whether people were happy. So classic example of that is when I was a kid at Christmas, and I got a Christmas present from my auntie, and it was a present that was essentially useless to me. I got a football, and the problem with that was I didn't know how to respond. So masking kicks in, and you look at the present and you think, well, it's a round ball. I'm obviously meant to play with it. I have no interest in playing with it. So my natural response as a honest, truthful, autistic person is, thank you, but I don't know what to do with this. So we very quickly learned that that's not an appropriate response. It upsets people. People have obviously put a great deal of time, effort, and probably even money into buying you a gift they thought you might use. So masking is where you formulate a response that's going to make them happy, even though it's not how you really feel. So in my case, the masking was, I had seen my brother receive his gift, and he sort of jiggled up and down a bit, made a happy face, shook his hands a bit with excitement, and said, oh, thank you. It's what I've always wanted. I've really always wanted one of these. This is great. I'm going to play with this now. I'm going to go upstairs and play. So my response was, thank you. I've always wanted one of these. I'm going to go outside and play with it now. That's masking. It's not a lie. It's trying very hard to fit in and not upset everyone else. The whole aim of masking is to prevent yourself from looking as weird as you know you are, and to try and fit in with society so that other people don't essentially drop you. It's a self-defense mechanism. It's necessary to live what you consider to be a relatively normal life. Quite often when people are autistic and they're diagnosed perhaps later in life, they try to unmask a little bit, and they very quickly find that it alienates them, because people have got used to you masking and used to you being one way, and then you try to change some of the responses and it doesn't generally go down well. However, it is worth persevering, but we'll do more of that in another video. The other thing that autistic people often do is use routines and repetition. The reason for that, of course, is that routines are predictable. They are comforting. When everything else around you is a swirling mist of ideas and concepts and things you have to think about and things you have to mask for, things that demand all of your attention when your brain is already busy processing everything else that's going on. A routine is something that you can rely on. It's something that is comforting. For example, I will have my breakfast ideally at the same time every day. I will eat the same food every morning. I will watch the same TV program while I eat my food every morning. And I know that my TV program is 7 minutes long. That's exactly how long it takes me to eat my breakfast. That's a routine. Repetitive behavior for the same reason. You have your routines for comfort. You use repetitive behaviors as a way of providing comfort because you know what's coming next. One thing that most autistic people do not like is surprises. We really don't enjoy surprises because surprises present you with a situation you haven't yet thought about. And if you haven't yet thought about it, there is an enormous overhead in mental processing that needs to happen when something unexpected happens. This is why we go for routine. This is why we go for predictable outcomes. Because of the sensory processing issues that we have with either oversensitivity or undersensitivity. Autism will often present itself most obviously when somebody goes out into perhaps a crowded or a noisy place, a very busy place, shopping malls, supermarkets, sitting on the train, whatever, going into a workplace even where there's perhaps an open plan office, lots of noise, lots of activity, telephones ringing, keyboards clacking away, people getting up and down and walking around all the time. These can be very distracting because an autistic person will literally need to identify every noise, every action, every movement, and deal with it internally. The amount of mental overhead used there is spectacular. You get tired really, really quickly. So these places are nightmares for many autistic people. A lot of things require quick decisions, and as we've already said, autistic people generally have some kind of processing delay because of the amount of work involved in processing things mentally. So these kind of places, you'll often be able to spot autistic people who are having trouble keeping up. This is one of the areas in which autism needs a lot of support. It's also the most obvious place where you will be able to see autism at work. You may not always know when somebody's masking. Some of us are incredibly good at it. Some of us have survived maybe 50 years, 60 years without ever being noticed, despite the fact that we are masking non-stop 24 hours a day. The other thing that autism also is, it is a disability. It is legally a disability. And the reason that they say it's a disability is because the brain works differently from a neurotypical, that is a normal, average human brain. So because it works differently, it puts us at a disadvantage, and that is the definition of a disability. It's something you can't do in the same way as everyone else. Autism, on the other hand, does have many advantages over the neurotypical brain. For example, in autism, you'll often see hyperfocus, the ability to focus all of your attention entirely for seemingly unlimited amounts of time on one particular problem or subject. This is an incredibly valuable skill, especially when it comes to things like computer programming, data analysis, workplace projects. All of these things need attention to detail, they need focus, and they need the ability to carry on even if you're feeling tired. And that's what autistic people can often do. It does mean that we often have greater attention to detail. If you see somebody who is particularly good or particularly talented at, say, spotting patterns in data that other people are missing, there's a very good chance that you're looking at autism at work. There are other conditions that tend to show up alongside autism, which are not directly related to autism, but they do co-occur with greater intensity. Autistic people, because of the amount of time they spend thinking about things, often have anxiety. They also quite often have ADHD. And in fact, there is now a term that's used to describe the combination of autism and ADHD. They call it AUDHD, AUDHD. ADHD, of course, being the situation where your brain can't stop and concentrate on one thing all the time, but it tends to want to jump from subject to subject very, very quickly and seemingly randomly. Another thing that often co-occurs with autism is a learning disability. A lot of people whose brains don't develop normally from birth will end up with a learning disability, which is from, again, anything from a very, very mild learning disability all the way up to an absolutely profound one. So these things co-occur, but they are not the same as autism. It's very important to understand the difference. Not everyone with autism has a learning disability or ADHD or even anxiety, but quite often you'll see them together. The bottom line about autism is that it's a different way of seeing things, a different way of doing things, and a different way of thinking about things. It certainly isn't any less valid than the typical way of seeing, doing, and thinking, but it does come with its own challenges compared to everyone else. So when somebody is autistic, they will probably need a degree of support from the people around them, whether that be friends or family or co-workers or your bosses, whatever, in order to be able to function and adapt to life in a neurotypical world. The fact that the neurotypical world is defined by people with what we call the normal brain, I think is quite demeaning. Autism is not an abnormal brain, it's a different brain.
Thanks for watching this Autism Infocast from autisminfocenter.org. Please like and subscribe for more great videos about autism and neurodiversity.